All right, after a week's hiatus, the boardroom is back in session. John Diehl, soon-to-be Speaker of the House, is back from Alaska. John Diehl checking in via Skype. Good morning, John Diehl.
Hey, good morning. How are you?
Good. How was Alaska? Did you miss us?
Cold and rainy.
Okay. I'll be there in a couple weeks with Altair Travel and Cruises.
Hopefully it'll be a little better.
Also with us is Jane Duker, former Chief of Staff to Governor Holden, and local gadfly. Good morning, Jane Duker.
Good morning.
Editorial page editor of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, Tony Messenger, back at his perch. Good morning, Tony.
Good morning. How you doing, McGraw?
Lots of things. Thank you very much. I'm doing well. Lots of things going on, including this transportation tax, which we're gonna vote on. Jay Nixon coming out not in favor of it, but putting it in an quote unquote off election. Tony Messenger, what's going on here?
Well, good for the governor because it's a bad proposal. It's the wrong tax. It's the wrong time, and the problem is the difficulty for St. Louis is that there are some transportation needs. We've got transit needs all across the state. We have road needs. Anybody who drives I-70 in particular, as I have for years, knows that there are issues with roads. The problem is that we as a state have become so unable to deal with difficult issues that instead of passing the right sort of tax to deal with roads, instead of doing it in the context of also dealing with education funding and everything else, the legislature puts a sales tax on the ballot initiative at the same time that it's cutting income tax, and it creates a massive shift in tax burden from the rich to the poor, and that's why the Post-Dispatch editorial board, among many other reasons, is opposing this tax. I think it's going to fail. I think the governor was right to put it on the August ballot, and I think that as a state we need to go back to the drawing board and realize, why can't we do what legislators came close to doing many years ago when Bill Stouffer, a Republican senator from Sedalia at the time, and Neil St. Onge, a Republican transportation chair from the House at the time, went around the state talking about a real interesting mix of taxes, including the gas tax, which is very low in the state, a user tax, maybe some tolls, doing some things to pay for the roads in which the users are paying for it, rather than this awful shift in tax burden from the rich to the poor.
John Diehl, you were in the room, and you were part of the reason why this transportation tax is going to be on the ballot. What are your thoughts on Tony Messenger's comments?
One, I think there's an amazing lack of intellectual curiosity about this, and some of the statements the governor made when I first heard them were actually quite shocking, because it was his Department of Transportation which was pushing this issue. That this governor and his departments engaged in very, very few issues this session. This happened to be one of them. And his transportation folks were in our offices constantly pushing this as their top priority. We have looked at other things in past years. We've looked at a mix of toll roads. I personally like the concept of toll roads. That was opposed by the Nixon administration and his transportation department. Gas taxes are something that we can look at, but shockingly enough, those are actually more unpopular than a general sales tax. And to Tony's point, they're actually more regressive than a general sales tax, because the person who has to go to work, the poor people that have to go to work and have to drive and do all those things can't afford a higher gas tax. When gas is almost at $4 a gallon, gas tax has no way to do it. So I agree with the concept that we need to find a solution to the transportation funding issues in the state, and we do have a transportation funding crisis coming. This is something where the governor did actually engage in. His department did actually support this, and apparently the governor changed his mind a few weeks ago. And if this isn't it, then we need to go back to the table and figure out what it is.
Jane Duker, you're a political expert. It was his choice to put it on this ballot, which is it's going to be very hard to pass.
I mean, I think the August ballot makes it more challenging. It prevents people, especially all the local governments who are putting together projects that they'd like to see funded. It's difficult for people to actually explain to the voters what's out there. I mean, in 2002, we were at this again, and we were putting transportation on the ballot again. And 12 years has gone by, and nothing's happened. I understand it's not perfect. A sales tax can be regressive. And by the way, this is something that could be changed. If we find that this doesn't work, then, we can add tolls. We can add some of the other things as people get, support and see what's happening. But to do nothing on transportation, to me, is unconscionable. If we wait for the perfect proposal, it isn't coming. We have a political reality here. We have a transportation funding crisis, and we have deteriorating roads, bridges. We're not doing anything for mass transit. I mean, we cannot move forward as a state without addressing transportation. And so, to me, it's not perfect, but the enemy, the enemy of getting anything done is trying to be perfect here. And
I think an important point on this too to remember is that this is something that the voters and the citizens of the state have to decide. We all we're authorized to do is to put a proposal on the ballot that the voters have to vote yes or no on. And if the voters of the state choose not to fund transportation further, that's certainly their prerogative, and that's the decision, the outcome that we'll deal with. So what bothers me though is the governor's disingenuous statements on this, and he's still throwing a temper tantrum over Senate Bill 509 because he lost the override. But until that happened, his department supported this even after that happened. I have thank you notes from the heads of his department thanking us for putting this on the ballot.
John, are you going to vote for the highest tax increase in Missouri history?
I probably not. In fact, when this came up, I indicated I didn't think this was actually the best way to go about it. But
so you actually agree with me and agree with Jay Nixon, and you're talking about intellectual dishonesty. I don't get it. You think it's a bad idea. You're going to vote against it.
I will probably end up voting against it, yes.
Okay.
But has nothing with intellectual dishonesty or intellectual curiosity on it. It's a question of we need to let the voters decide on how to do it. Personally, I think tolls should play a bigger role on it.
Should we let the voters
say, but make no mistake, Tony, this is the governor's proposal.
Well, it's not exactly the governor's proposal because you have to consider it in the context.
What his department was advocating. We tried to do a couple sessions ago, as you indicated, with Bill Stouffer was still in the mix on this.
And MoDOT was worried. MoDOT was worried that any other type of mix wouldn't pass. That's how this came up. Was an idea that politically this was the best way to get it done. It's not perfect, and so now the bottom line is because of this, we're going to get nothing for this issue, and we're going to kick the can down the road again.
Let me make sure I understand.
Make no mistake that there was MoDOT and it was the governor's transportation people that nixed the other proposals. This was the one they decided to get behind.
Let me make sure I understand all this. John Diehl, you're saying that Jay Nixon and his administration pushed for this bill, which is now he's opposing and put it on a more troublesome position for it to actually pass. But this was the bill that he wanted to come out of the House and the Senate.
This was the bill that his Department of Transportation and his appointees were pushing. Absolutely.
And this is the one you guys passed, and yet you're not necessarily endorsing it.
Well, I think there's a better mix of way of doing it. Tony asked if I was going to vote for it. I said probably not because I don't like tax increases, period. Okay, I think there's still a lot more waste and things we can cut out of government before we do this. But the reality of the situation is this is the constitutional way to let the voters decide if this is what they're going to do.
Tony, last word.
This is what is so frustrating to people about politics. John is right when he says the governor has at times pushed this, but to say that he's being somehow contradictory or flip-flopping on it now, you have to consider it in the context of the rest of tax policy in the state. And passing 509 changed everything because it took a big hole out of the future state budget. So that's reasonable. But then you also have John on his side talking about how the governor is the one who's the problem, who isn't engaged, et cetera. And then and he's the guy who puts it on the ballot, and now he's saying he's against it. This is why people get so frustrated with politicians, because they won't just come out and tell us what they think.
That's Tony Messenger, editorial page editor of the Post-Dispatch. John Deal is here via Skype. He's a current House Majority Leader, soon to be Speaker of the House, and former Chief of Staff to Governor Holden, Jane Duker. 920, Big 550, KT.